podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Manchester United return to Premier League winning ways with home victory over Brentford. Relief. A very warm welcome to this bite-sized midweek episode of the Manchester United Weekly Podcast with Harry Robinson and Jack Tait. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're well. Jack, there's very little admin to do in midweek. We're just talking about the Brentford game and previewing Saturday lunchtime's game against Everton. So let's dive straight in. Your initial reaction to the Brentford game, relief the main overriding feeling?
Yeah, definitely. After the game, especially, I actually thought first half is one of our best performances of the season. That we really dominated the game massively in possession. Probably a level of control that we haven't really seen. Maybe since the Spurs game this season. I'm sure there's been one or two that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But real complete domination, helped by the fact that I think it was a very surprisingly passive performance by Brentford.
Yeah,
but really good signs in the first half. In the second, we kind of faded, as unfortunately I think you'll probably see quite a lot throughout the rest of the season given the number of games that we've played, but held on. Probably should have got the second goal, but overall a positive night, and like you said, definitely relief coming out of it and holding on for the win. Yeah,
absolutely. Should have got the second goal. I think Ten Hag, I was sat above the tunnel as usual, and Ten Hag at half-time looked furious. He was kind of marching down, and the look on his face wasn't that dissimilar at full-time. It was less intense, but not that dissimilar. And I think there was definitely some frustration there. And you could see it in the players as well, actually. There were a couple of really good opportunities that less poor finishing, more poor execution of that final ball or wrong decision making at the very end, which I think we could talk about. But the goal itself, you can tell it wasn't poor finishing because that from Rashford was absolutely clinical. And I think I underestimated it while watching live because it was from a corner. It was at the other end of the ground to me, in front of K-stand. Rather than in front of the Stretford end, a rare game which has been won at that end of Old Trafford rather than the Stretford end this season. A genuinely very, very rare thing. And yeah, I think because it was at the other end of the ground, I underestimated it a little bit, but actually a brilliant little ball in, a lovely cushioned header by Marcel Sabitzer, and fantastic, powerful inside of the foot finish from Rashford.
I've got to say, I think I underestimated both the finish and the assist by Sabitzer watching it live. I thought that the defender had won the header over Sabitzer and it had just kind of fallen to Rashford and he just poked it in. But watching it again, really good awareness from Sabitzer running, with his back to goal to just knock it down to Rashford. And then, great finish. He mentioned Rashford in his interview after the game that it was slightly instinctive, but it was also, he very much intended to kind of get some height on it because he's seeing how close in he was and that Raya was in a pretty good position to potentially make a save. He really kind of intentionally tried to put it into the roof of the net, which is, the kind of thing that the top strikers are thinking about all the time, and to have the control to do it and not put it over.
It's the kind of thing that will really never fail to amaze me. That for elite sportsmen and women, time just seems to slow down when for everyone else, it's just this absolute carnage of an anticipation. Yeah. Carry on.
It's also that you're totally right, and I think I don't really know how to put this into words properly, but it's almost like it's like consciously thinking unconsciously. I don't think that Rashford, while that ball is dropping to him, exactly. I don't think he's got a little voice in his head saying, "Well, okay, Raya's in this position. I should put that into the roof of the net," because by that point the ball's already in the back of the net. But it's just it's not like a conscious sort of thought stream, but it's just this, like you said, muscle memory and this like instinctive nature to know, okay, based on the way everyone else is set up here, here's what I should do without having to actually kind of go through the thought process. And you see it differently when like centre backs are up there. Like think about someone like Chris Smalling, or even really most centre backs, if they're in a position like that, they should put their foot through it.
Did you just realise that Chris Smalling's a bad example because of his several brilliant finishes for United and England in the box? That derby when we stopped them winning the league was a great finish on the volley.
That was, yeah.
Anyway, the first half overall, that was a deserved lead, wasn't it? And it was nice to see. As you said, I think Brentford were far from their best, but there was a point about 10 or 15 minutes in where you just thought, this is a lot more comfortable than I thought, because I hadn't been very confident going into this game, going into the Brentford and Everton games. I did remember when I was sat in the pub before we went to the ground, your words in our last episode where you said, I think our home form will carry us through. And I thought, actually, yeah, we are very good at home. And I think that stretches the unbeaten run at Old Trafford to, I think it's 24 games. It's either 23 or 24, which is very, very good. And I remembered that, and that gave me a bit of confidence. But yeah, it felt more comfortable than I'd anticipated. And we just pinned an opponent back with some sustained attacks, which is really good. I think that was helped by the personnel on the pitch. Antony and Sancho, I thought both of them, their end product was off in different ways, I think, which is a big concern for both of them. We spoke a lot about Antony and Sancho in the last episode, particularly in the Patreon Q&A. It's so different with them, isn't it? Because Antony shoots almost every time and Sancho seems to pause almost every time. And 1 in every 5 or 10, they get it right. And we create something, which is, you'd think something that hopefully they'll learn from.
Yeah, with Sancho, the issue is that the volume of output isn't there. And with Antony, the volume is definitely there, but the quality isn't. And you sort of want them to learn a little bit from each other. But yeah, I think the first half, like you said, we really just pinned Brentford back. I was really surprised with how they approached the game. We talked on the previous episode about how we expected Brentford to really come out and press us high up the pitch as they did in the away fixture earlier on in the season. You know, that's kind of been the blueprint to beat United for a couple of years now. So I was really shocked at how passive they were. But at the same time, you know, we took advantage of that massively. And, you know, to me, it felt a little bit like a little bit of a glimpse into the future of how Ten Hag wants us to play, because I've watching that game, I felt like our entire play was kind of running through the fullbacks. And that isn't really something that we've seen throughout the season. We've seen the fullbacks come inside and obviously try and come into midfield, but especially Luke Shaw. Shaw was sort of doing it in deeper areas and Dalla was doing it much further up the pitch. But I felt like all of our good play was kind of going through those two. Shaw a couple of times dropping into midfield, you know, some brilliant touches, one brilliant run that ended up with him slipping as he was trying to shoot. There was quite a few other occasions where he'd receive the ball from the centre-backs and he'd be kind of playing that sort of number 6 role almost. And then Dallo and Antony, their movement and interchange between them was causing all sorts of problems for Henry and me on Brentford's left-hand side. You know, Dallo was almost playing as far forward as all of our forwards for a lot of time in the first half. And it really just felt like a different way of using the fullbacks to what we've seen throughout this season. And to me, it felt like a bit of a glimpse into what we might see in, you know, a year, 18 months from now as Ten Hag kind of develops this team and gets us playing in a more sort of dominant fashion on the ball.
And I guess that reflects in the style of wingers or inside forwards in having Antony and Sancho rather than Rashford. Martial came on again for the second game in a row. That's probably United's best 3, isn't it? Martial, Rashford and Antony.
Yeah, at this point, I think so.
At the moment, which is, Martial's past is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, which is odd because I think the difference is that we know Martial can do it for United and we've not yet seen Sancho do it consistently for United, because you could look at his past at Borussia Dortmund and say, he would deserve to be in that 3. I just think Sancho just hasn't got the conviction and there's no power to his play whatsoever, is there? Which it's not the be all and end all, but I don't think you see many Premier League wingers with the lack of power that he has. And if they do have that trait, they tend to either fail or develop it. I think we've seen it with almost every Premier League winger if they have a long career. And you get the sense that Sancho needs that. It's power in kind of everything he does. It's also a matter of confidence, sure, but I think generally just from a physical point of view, it's not there right now. Or if it is there, he's not using it. But yeah, I think Martial is showing he's better than Weghorst. It gives a glimmer of hope. You think if we can get him to play 1 or 2 of every 3 games for the rest of the season, which is a very big if, that we've got a much better chance of finishing comfortably in the top 4 and winning 1 or 2 of the 2 trophies we remain in.
Yeah, I think from a United point of view, you're sort of hoping Martial could play 7 to 10 games for the rest of the season. I think that would be brilliant if we could get that. He's clearly not at his best just yet, as you would expect, having had such a long layoff. But even just in the little cameos that he's had, I think you can see that we are a better team with him in there than Weghorst. Again, as we've talked about a lot throughout the season, I don't think Weghorst has done a bad job. He just was always a stopgap, and that's fine. But Martial does offer us just a lot more in terms of the link-up play. He sort of does, like the thing that Weghorst is best at on the ball is his hold-up play and his ability to, drop deep, bring others into the game, and then let other people kind of make runs in behind him. Martial also does that. The thing that Weghorst should be better at is his aerial ability and being able to kind of be more physical. But as we talked about throughout the season, that sort of weirdly isn't a huge part of what he's good at. And so really you're not really losing out on that side of the game. But then Martial does bring a lot more in terms of his ability. Once he is on the ball, if he can be on the half turn and run at people, he's much better at kind of being part of our play moving forward. So,
still see those,
like we said,
you see some of his brilliant footwork, and it is exciting, but it's still far from good enough. And
100%.
You watch United, I mean, all through the season, but particularly in the last few weeks and last night at Old Trafford was no break from this pattern where you watch United and think, oh, just put a striker in there and like a proper. There's not enough dynamism in that United attack at all.
Yeah,
which is, I mean, it's not just down to personnel, is it? Because you'd happily use the word dynamic to talk about Rashford and Antony and Sancho in the past as well, and Martial in the past, but it's missing the extra piece to make the rest of them play at their best. But yeah, overall, I mean, we got through a game without Casemiro and Eriksen, which is an achievement in itself. Probably another word, it was pretty typical David De Gea, wasn't it? One brilliant save to affect, I mean, yeah, I guess you could count as a match-winning save because it was 1-0 at the time and that would have made it 1-1. Thought a fairly poor finish from, I can't remember who it was running through for Brentford. He tried to lift it off De Gea rather than put it through his legs. But yeah, a match-winning save, and yet that moment with Tony, which I think it felt a long time coming. We knew you could see he was going to do that, and it just keeps happening. I did notice in the first half when De Gea was in front of, like directly in front of me where I sit in the ground, the lack of, and I noticed this at Newcastle as well, to be fair, the lack of options is, I think De Gea is getting a lot of the stick for United's inability to play out from the back. And you see the lack of options and intensity in the movement of the rest of the team when De Gea has the ball. Maybe it comes down to the fact that they don't trust him to find them, so that they're not putting that extra 10% in to get into the right spots. But there's a wider issue at play here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I felt for De Gea a couple of times because the crowd is starting to get on his back whenever he doesn't release it quickly. And a lot of the time you think there's actually no option there for him. So I think it goes two ways, of course, but I do think the rest of the team needs to step up and give him those options and make his transition, if this is going to be a transition. I still think United will probably sign a goalkeeper in the summer, but if this is going to be a transition to playing slightly different, the rest of the team have to make that easier for him.
Yeah, massively agree. We talked about this with the first Newcastle goal at the weekend, that you sort of watch it and you think that comes from, Varane making a bit of a mistake, that comes from De Gea giving him a bad pass in the build-up. But you watch that and really it's also on the other players to create some better options, because sure, De Gea doesn't play the best pass, but then McTominay can make a much easier move to come and give Varane an easy option. I did think against Brentford, in the first half, I thought De Gea's distribution was better than normal. And that was, I think, partly because, as we mentioned, Brentford were giving us so much more time than I ever expected them to. But I did think there were some good moments there, times when the ball did go into midfield, actually into Shaw a few times in that sort of Eriksen kind of area when Shaw was going infield. We did some nice things, I think, building up from the back. But again, if we were under a bit more pressure.
I wonder if Brentford didn't press quite as high because they thought United's weakness was in midfield, not at the back anymore. Because there's obviously that weakness with De Gea, but in terms of Martinez and Varane, you wouldn't. They're not. I mean, Varane's not always the best under pressure, but the real kind of weak on the ball presence was there in McTominay and Sabitzer did well. They both actually had very good games, but I wonder whether Brentford thought we'll let it get into midfield and then we'll really target them.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really explain because it sort of goes against what Brentford are known for in their style of play. You know, it felt like a bit of a perfect storm in that this is a sort of playing a much more aggressive game in defence is sort of what Brentford do generally, and it's also what we struggle to play against. So it felt like a kind of an obvious choice, but you know, it was good for us that they didn't because I think it allowed us to start the game much more confidently and much more aggressively than we probably otherwise could have done, which I think then just built the confidence for the entire first half. Yeah.
Anyway, let's wrap up. 3 points. That's all that matters, really. And yeah, back to winning ways is massive. The 2 key stats to wrap up. Marcus Rashford scored his 28th goal of the season. That's the joint most by a United player in a single season since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and Van Persie got a few more than that. And the other one, Rashford scored his 10th winning goal in the Premier League this season, the most by a United player in a single season since Wayne Rooney in 2009, the 2010 season, which I think says everything about Rashford's quality this year and how it ranks in the past decade or so. Everton on Saturday, a little bit more confident after that. I think we'll all be, won't we?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, it's at home. I am even going into the Brentford game. I wasn't confident about the sort of the matchup between United and Brentford, but I was confident. I'm confident playing anyone at home at the moment. You know, our home record has been phenomenal. I think it's something like 52 goals scored and 12 conceded at home since we lost to Brighton on the first game of the season. So it is a bit of a fortress. Having said that, Everton under Sean Tait are a very different side to the one that we played earlier this season, and they definitely won't make this easy for us. And so I think it's going to probably end up being a somewhat similar game to Brentford, but I would imagine a bit more of a physical challenge for United to get through. Yeah.
They've shown some serious weaknesses when they've played since Sean Dyche came in. So I think we should be confident. And one game closer to Casemiro's return.
And potentially Eriksen very soon as well. I mean, this is the last game without Casemiro, isn't it?
Yep, final one.
Yeah.
And then Sevilla comes after. So, yeah, exciting. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. You know where to find us on Twitter for our reaction during the week, and we'll be back next Monday evening to review the Everton game and preview our Europa League quarter-final against Sevilla. Until then, have a great week. Goodbye.
Podcast Network.
Football Social Daily.
This week on Football Social Daily, we've been speaking to former Premier League defender Roger Johnson. Roger was as tough as they come and very nearly died after a horrific neck injury.
He done me off the ball, coward, caught me across the larynx, and the surgeon said to me, he was like, "Luke, I've never seen this injury on a living person. Extremely lucky."
You can hear the full story behind that moment and indeed what it was like to be Arsenal at Wembley with Birmingham City in 2011 by listening to the full edition of Football Social Daily, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Football Social Daily, the Premier League